So welcome back to Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And this is actually Red Hat Administration 1 or Red Hat Enterprise Linux Administration 1. Now, we are talking about Red Hat Enterprise Linux 1, and we are basing it on chapter 5, 6, and 7. If you are able to have a look at my previous videos, I had actually covered the first chapter, second, and third. And now we want to cover chapter 6, chapter 5, chapter 6, and chapter 7. Now, when it comes to chapter 5, 6, and 7, we are talking about 3 chapters. And the first chapter is managing local users and groups. And second chapter is about controlling access to files and then monitoring and managing Linux processes. So in this video, I want you to just enjoy it. And yeah, we start on managing local users and groups. Now, based on this topic, managing local users and groups, what do we understand when we talk about users or Linux users or any user created in Red Hat environment? Or what do we understand when it comes to groups? So I know that the term users simply means that it's more attached to us as humans, but when it comes to the system, it's more like an account. And when we talk about a user, or when we talk about Red Hat account, we talk about Oracle account, those are users. So when both of them come together, they form up something called a group. So we need to understand what do we mean by local users and what do we mean by groups. Now, at this point, I have sort of a slide, and I just want to see what are some of the topics that we are supposed to learn, or what is the goal of having or understanding managing local users and groups. Now, with me here is that our goal is to understand the creation, or how do we create, how do we manage, how do we delete local users and groups and administer local password policies. So I'm going to probably talk about, to cover the goal or the objectives, because when it comes to the objectives, you can see that we need to describe the purpose of users and groups on Linux system. At the same time, we need also to switch, how to switch to the super user account to manage a Linux system and grant other users, super users access using the sudo command. And then create, modify, and delete locally defined user accounts, create, modify, and delete locally defined group accounts, and then set a password management policy for users and manually lock and unlock user accounts. Now, for this part, we're going to cover, we're going to cover all these objectives, if not all, but just ensure that you get to know, to understand, or get the concept that it is here. Now, so when you talk about users and groups, remember our platform is actually Red Hat Enterprise Operating System, and this is how it is, or this is how it looks like. So when it comes to Red Hat operating system, we are using actually the latest version, which is Red Hat 8, and we need to understand some concepts related to what? Related to managing local users and groups. So in this part, we will start from understanding the users. So when we talk about users in Red Hat, or when we talk about users in Red Hat operating system, we are talking about the accounts, or we are talking about the administrative accounts. You see, I can have different accounts. And let me just show you one thing. So if I tend to, let's say, switch users, for this case, I do not have any user. The only user I have is only a single user. So I will only show you how we do this. Now, for this case, we have some commands, especially when it comes to using Linux operating system. we are actually getting to know more about the commands, because yes, it's more similar to Windows operating system, but for this case, it's instead of navigating through the operating system graphically, you navigate it through, by using commands. So it has both sides. You can actually go the graphical way, or you can go the command way. But because we have a terminal, mainly we are concentrating on going where? On having now the command. It's more of command-based operating system. So for example, if I type, for example, ID will actually give me the currently logged in user. If I press enter, you can see that the currently logged in user is actually RHEL8. Now, this is by default, a username that I gave while I was installing or, performing the installation of this operating system. So you will always be prompted to give out or to give a name of your default user. So for this case, you can see that we have RHEL8. We also have RHEL8 here, and then we also have RHEL8 here. Now, whatever values that are coming before this name, for example, we have the UID. UID stands for user ID. So every user created in Linux must be attached to a user ID. So it must start from 1000. And we have so many users. We have, let's say, the regular users, we have like the system users, and each one must be attached a UID. So you'll find out that when it comes to using, coming up with different users, you will actually view or see that each user is assigned a unique identifier or a user ID. So another part is that that particular user will also have a primary group ID. That's why you see what? 1000 here. So GID stands for group ID. Unless you specify otherwise, it will always be attached to a primary group ID. And then, of course, we have the groups. So the RHEL8 or the user is also assigned a group. So these are clearly like examples or some of the few things we can talk about users. Now, if you have more than one user or multiple users, and then you want to check probably the user ID in this manner, you can actually use what? You can actually use the ID command and then followed by that user. If the user is Sami, for instance, if the user's account or the name of that particular account is Sami, then if you want to view that from the currently logged in user, you're supposed to use ID and then followed by what? Followed by the name of that particular user, which is in essence is Sami. So in this case, what we need to get to know first before even we check about or we look at the IDs or their different IDs, just to know that the user ID, the first user you assigned while installing the operating system, will always have a UID 1000. Any other user that comes after that, it will actually be added on top of 1000. So you can have 1001, you can have 1002, 1003, depending on the number of users you want. Remember, these users are more of administrative accounts. Now, how do we come up or how do we create a user account? For instance, you can see that one, we need to understand how do we create and how do we manage and delete. Now, to create a user, we need to use this command, user add. We need to use this command called user add. And look at this point. Look at this part. At this part, if I expand it, you'll find out that I have only one user, which is RHEL8. If I expand it, you'll find that the only thing I'm provided here is logout or the account settings. So if I have to come up with different users also, it will be line up here. It will be RHEL8. Then if I have RHEL9, it will also come down here. So for this part, it means that we do not have any other user apart from RHEL8. It's very interesting because for you to have a user, you need to create it manually by using what? By using commands. So let's do it. Let's do it and see what happens. So here, I need to come up with user RHEL9. Let's have RHEL9. Remember, this is just a name representing a user account or an account. I can also give it my name, let's say Sammy. And automatically, if I press enter, you can see that user had. Yes, it's the right command, but in this case, I do not have the permission to execute. Why? Because like cannot log etc passwd, try again later. Now, this means what? It does not mean that I have a problem or I have actually experienced a challenge. It's only that I am operating from a different account. For this case, we have two users. We have a normal user and we have a root user. We have a normal user and we have a root user. So when it comes to using now, like trying to explain the differences between a normal user and a root user or a super user always has more privileges, or we can actually term it as a privileged user. So he's actually behind is a user who can, who actually administrates, or who actually has a full rights of administration. And he can also do what? He can also act as a user who create other users. So if we need to have the administration of the entire, let's say, operating system, then we can attach ourselves to this particular account or this particular user called root user. So how do we switch it? I know that I've actually showed you in the previous videos or in my previous videos how to switch between the normal user's account and what? And the super user. So how do we go about this? So I need to use what? SU. SU means what? The pseudo user or the super user, you can call it. So in this case, I need to use SU. And then I press enter. For this case, I'll be prompted to enter what? The root password. So for my root password is Red Hat. So if I press enter, now you can see that the account has changed from what? From the $sign, which is actually a symbol of being connected to a normal user's account, to what? To the hash sign, which simply represents what? The root account. Now, in this case, if I come back now and rerun the same command, this time round, Sammy, press enter, you can see automatically that I do not have what? I do not have this information or these messages again. Why? Because I have successfully managed to add a user. I have successfully managed to add a user. Now, remember, when creating a user, you also have the option of deleting that user. Now, let's check the availability of this user. For this particular user, if I want to check whether I have successfully created this particular user, what I need to do, I need to go to a file. For this case, it's actually a configuration file attached to what? Storing users' information. So for this case, it's because it's actually a file. And that means that for me to view the contents of this particular file, I need to use the cat command. Remember, we have the differences between viewing the contents, or a command for viewing the contents of a directory, and the command for viewing the contents of a text file or a file. So for my case, I want to view the contents of what? Of a text file. So I'll just say cat. This text file is actually under /etc. If you remember the file system directory, and then I will just use passwd. So the last name, the passwd, stands for password, and this means that for this is more like it's a file that stores only passwords. No, it's a file that actually stores what? Users information. And then of course I'll show you which file also stores what? Passwords information connected or linked to every user. So what happens to this? If I press enter, you can see that we have a lot of info. We have a lot of info. But we are interested with the last line. Let's say the last 2 lines. And for this case, I can do what? I can narrow it down. Let me narrow it down. Let me clear my screen and narrow it down so that we can only get what? Only get the 2 lines. So for this case, if you execute this, it means that you will only get what? You will only get the whole information or the entire lines. If we have 8 lines or all the records in PassWD, it will all be displayed. So how can we probably, sort out? So here I will just use tail because we are looking at the tail, and then say n, -n for the number, and then let's say the last 3. Now press enter. Now you can see that we have now the last 3 lines. Now, if I can bring, let's say, the last 1 line or the last 1 line, 2 lines, you can see now that we have 2 users. We have RHL8, which is of course by default, my default user. And I have Sammy, which is a newly created user. Now, let me show you, how do I create another user? Let's say we have a user called Mike. Press enter. Mike is created. Let me have another one. User had, let's say, RHL9. You see, these users are well created. Now, let's view it. So let me say I want the last 4 lines. Now, you can see that we have what? We have RHL8, we have Sammy, we have Mike, and we have RHL9. Now, for this case, I can clear. For this case, it means what? It's only RHL user, which is actually an account. We only have 1 account here, although we have like all those users, but we have what? We have only 1 account. Now, for me to display, let's say, to display all these other accounts or all these other users, how do we do, or how do we go about? So something has happened. So when it comes to these users, okay, so here it means that if I have already, this one is a user account because RHL8, you can see that I am able to do what? I am allowed to select this particular user, and then after selecting by clicking, I'll be prompted to enter the password. So the password for my case is red@8, and let's see what happens. So I will just minimize and expand it, and this time around, I think it is okay. It has come back to its normal size. So what happens is, let me clear it and then redo it. Yeah. So you can see now that we have these 3 newly created users. So for these newly created users, they are not yet accounts. Why? Because they've not been assigned a password. Now, let me show you. Let's prove whether passwords have been assigned to these users. Now, a very big concept or a very important concept here again is about what? You see, we have this newly created user, but immediately we have the X. Each one has the X. Each one has the X immediately after the name. Now, what is the representation of X, or what is the essence or the significance or the importance of having X in that part? You see, initially in the previous versions of Red Hat, both the username and the password were being stored under etc passwd, or they are being stored under passwd file. But because of security reasons or security features, they decide that we come up with a different file, which would only take in what? Only take in passwords attached to any user created or any newly created user. So X, instead of that gap now, because remember, it was all about having an encrypted password that immediately after Sami or RHL8, we could have a very long line of code that represents what? An encrypted password. So for this case, they had to get rid of that encrypted password from pass.d file and take it to a different file, which is actually /etc shadow. So we have this particular file, which is actually storing what? Password. So let's confirm whether we have passwords attached to these files. So we'll just come, this case, I will also use tail and then -n5, and then let's say cut, and then press enter. Now look at this. Red Hat or my user account, which is RHL8, already has a what? Already has a password attached to it. This password is an hashed password or encrypted password, and you can see how it is. This one is a representation of my password, which is actually Red Hat. So with this case, it means what? It means that I have the RHL8, which is already an account. But for Sami is not yet an account because I have not actually assigned a password. Mike is not yet an account. I have not assigned any password. RHL9 is not yet an account because I have not assigned a password. So this comes, before we assign the password, I need also to take you to the next step, which is about what? Managing. But in this case, before managing, let me show you what? Delete. How do we delete this file? So let me just take it back. And you can see that we have RHL9, we have Mike, we have Sami. How do we delete them? So for this case, you can say user del, and then you can say what? You can just specify the name of the user. Sami, press enter. Now you can see no message has been given out. It has actually executed successfully. If I can go back, let's get rid of Mike. Now you can see after some time it has been deleted. User del. Now let's go back and recheck it, whether we have it. So this time round, press enter. Now you can see that the only remaining users is RHL8 and RHL9. So it is actually very important for you to understand the concept of creating a user and also deleting a user. Creating a user and deleting a user. Now in this concept, on this part, if I clear my screen, or okay, if you want to clear my screen, there it is. Now remember, clearing or using the command clear, it's not about deleting whatever thing we did. No, it's all about clearing the screen or just giving a room for more commands. You see, if I scroll it up, already we have what? We have our previous commands. So it's not about deleting. It's not about deleting. Now, so for this part now, if I can take you through this other part, you see, when modifying users, and for instance, we have this command called ls. And for this case, let me just see, where are we? Let me just point, where are we operating from? PWD. Press enter. You can see that I'm actually at RHL8, which is actually under home. So if I want to list the contents of RHL8, press enter. You can see we have what? We have desktop, documents, downloads, music, pictures, public, templates, and videos. This is just like any other operating system. Now, I want to change my directory from RHL8. Let's get to desktop. Now, in desktop, if I just use ls, you see it is actually empty. If I list the contents of desktop, nothing is there. Now, the desktop here represents what? It represents this area. So how do we come up with a folder? For example, let's come up with a file. So this file, I'm going to create a file, a directory, mkdir, let's call it bookshop. Press enter. And then let me create a text file. Let me call it bookshop.txt. Press enter. Now, if I list now the contents of desktop, remember it was blank, but now I have managed to come up with two files. That is a directory called bookshop and a text file called bookshop.txt. If I press enter, you can see now that I have what? I have something or some files in my desktop folder. So what happens here is this. If I want to check, let's say, the file permissions for this case and who owns these files, I will just use bookshop, press enter, and you can see that, yes, it's actually like total 0. Why? Because -L is an option which represents list. So if you want to view the contents or the files, who owns and the file permissions, just include D for a directory. If you press enter, now you can see that we have that. Now, so here it means what? Let me clear screen again. So let me just use ls-l so that we can view everything. So in this case, you can see that we have what? We have these permissions. Of course, I will show you, or I will let you understand about these permissions. But look at this. We have root and then we have root. It means what? Root is the owner, or is actually behind, is a user who owns what? This folder called bookshop. Then the second root is the group. So it means that we have a user named root, and we also have a group named root. The second file is just the same, root. So it means that I have successfully managed to come up with the two files as root. So the owner is actually the root. Now, let me attach a password. Let me attach a password to that user. You see, we have these users. So if I just go back, I don't know. Okay, let me say, okay, password. Let me just say 2, press enter. You see, we have RHL9, which already is an account. RHL8 is already an account because what? It has a password. RHL9 is not yet a what? Is not yet an account because we've not assigned a password to it. So how do we assign a password to it? To assign a password to it, to this user account, you must issue the word passwd, which is actually a command used to assign passwords, So here it means I will just come and say RHL9 and press enter. Look at that. So I'm having a different view, that changing password for user RHL9. So the new password for RHL9, let me give it like Reddit. Hope it will accept. Let me give it again, Reddit. So all authentication tokens updated successfully. So ensure that you type the password and retype the same password when prompted down there. So in this case, if I go to this side, you see from this side, that is on my left part, my right-hand part, and then click that drop-down arrow. Let me just check this. And then we have RHL8. Now, if I click the drop-down arrow and then come and say switch user. If I click at it and then wait for some few minutes, successfully you can see that I have now the two users. I have the default user, which is RHL8, and now I have RHL9, which already is a newly created account. And how was it created? By being assigned a password. That qualifies it to become an account. So if I click at it, it prompts me to enter a password, and then I will initiate the password and then press enter, and then automatically it will open that account. So it means that now it's a newly created account, which is being given as RHL8. RHL9, not RHL8. So it's actually a newly created account. Now, so I want to switch it back So let's switch it back. Okay, let me switch it back. You see when it's RHL 9, click switch, it takes you back. Okay, click it, let's see. So it'll just come here. So let's just wait for a few minutes. So when it comes to creating users, you have to understand who owns the files. Who is the owner of a file, whether it's a directory, whether it's a text file, who actually owns the files. So here it is, I'm being brought back. So let's go to our default account. Let me share the password, press enter, and then yes, we are back to this point. So that is how to successfully come up with an account. Now, so in this case, it means that if I do ls-l, I'll be in a position to view the owner of the file, user who owns bookshop folder or directory, and the one who owns bookshop.txt file. So all of them are what? All of them are root. Now, the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to introduce how do we manage user accounts? How do we manage user accounts? Now, for this case, we have only one user. We have only one user, one extra user, which is actually RHL9. So how do we manage? How do we manage these users? So we use what? User mode. We use user mode. And by using user mode, for this case, we can actually decide that we want to do what? We decide that it's either we want to lock that user from accessing. Let's assume that we want to lock that user from accessing, or to exempt that user, or just to put that user in an inactive mode. How do we inactivate, or how do we put it in an inactive mode, so that anybody cannot actually log into that user's accounts? So if you want that, just put -l user mode space -l, and then just write RHL9. Let's press enter. Now what happens here? User mode -l RHL9. Now the root, you see, a root is actually a super user. The root is actually a super user. You can actually connect to any user while you are at root. So let's see, if I want to connect back, I will just use SU, and then let's say RHL9, press enter. You can see that I have successfully managed to switch the account from root account to a normal user's account, which is actually what? RHL9. Now in RHL9, let's see whether we are able to access a different user. So in this case, I just say RHL9. If I press enter, yes, you can see SU RHL9. And then if I put Redat, okay, it's not even RHL9. Sorry for that. I know this one is going to bring an error. Authentication fail. You see even that one already. And then I will come to RHL8, press enter, put Redat. Now, of course, this one has taken me to Redat, RHL9. I mean RHL8, because while connected as a user, you can actually do what? You can connect to any other user. Now, let me see. SU RHL9, and then let me put Redat. You see, SU RHL9 password authentication. So while we are connected, you see, while you are connected as another user, let's say RHL8, put password. Now you can see that for me to switch to a different account, because already I'm using Redat, it's already RHL8 at this point. You see RHL8. But for me to switch to RHL9, since I have actually locked this account, for me to switch, RHL9, press enter, and then decide to put the red hat or the password, press enter, you can see what? We have a problem that the authentication failure. So this one does not have any effect. It's not connected that the user account is failed. No, it's because that the account has been deactivated in some way by a super user, or it has been banned. You see, the account can be banned from being used. It can be given, given the status of, being deactivated, or it can be stopped for some time. So what happens now after some time? So after some times, the super user who is actually red hat, the super user is actually the root for this matter, can allow or can bring back the account to life, or can actually unlock the account. So how can you unlock the account as an administrator, or as a super user, or as a system administrator? So this is how you do. So you'll just use user mode and then -u for unlock, and then say RHL9 and press enter. So for this one, you've actually successfully managed to do what? To unlock the account. Now let's see, I'll just go to RHL8, press enter, and then let's see whether you can switch back to RHL9. This time round, we were given what? We were given a note here that authentication failure. Let's see whether we can experience that problem again. Now you can see we are prompted in the password, and then automatically we are in. So this time around, we do not have any authentication failure message coming up, but we are successfully logged in. We are actually successfully logged in. So when it comes to using this, I know that there's a lot to be talked about. This is just like a video or a tutorial that introduces you to learn more. You see, we have more to learn when it comes to managing local users and groups, and especially to the users. That is exactly what I've actually given you, just a taste of it. And then from there, we can have now, just look for more detailed information, in your Red Hat Enterprise Linux 1 book. Now, for the groups, you see, we are talking about managing users and groups. So how do we come up with groups? So to come up with a group, we need to say group had, and then we can say what? Let me have a group called, let's say country. Country is the name of the group. Press enter. So permission denied, the same thing. You have to operate or execute these commands as what? As a super user. So you have to switch to this account, put Red Hat, and then you are switching. Now, the difference of like, how can I know that I'm not operating as a root user? You will only be physically, you'll always see the symbols. Are you operating from the $sign or the $symbol, or are you operating from the hash symbol? So this actually does what? So I have actually used a switch account, and I've successfully managed to put a password, and here I have. So let's rerun the same. So I'll just say, now for this case, before we create a group or come up with a group, how do we know, or which configuration files contains groups? So the configuration files for groups is etc group. Press enter. You will successfully see that we have a group for RHL9, which has been created. And then we also have RHL8, which has been created. So whenever you come up with a user, automatically a group would be attached. This group is actually called a primary group, but you can also define a secondary group by using the group had command. So let me just use group had, and then let's say the group is actually country. Group had, the group is actually called country. Now, if we go back to this, and this time around, let me sort it. Let me say tail -n, and then let me give like 4, press enter. you can now see that we have an additional group, which is actually what? Country. RHL9 at this point is not a user. It's actually a group because I am looking or I'm trying to get this information from the group side. And we also have RHL8, which is not a user's name, it's actually the group name. So anytime you come up with a user, even if you call it Obama, a group will always be automatically created attached to that particular user called Obama. So the user will be Obama, the group will be Obama. So unless otherwise. Now, let's come to our files here. You see now that the group we have is root. The group we have is root. Now, let me create another group. So let me create another group. Let me have a group called continent. The group has been created. Now, if I go back and say this, you can see that we have what? Continent. Now, how do I delete a group? To delete a group, you have to use what? Group del. Group del, and then let's say continent. Press enter. The group has been deleted. Let's reconfirm it. This time round, the last group is actually a country. So for this case, it means that I have managed to delete a group called continents. So to create a group, just call it group had. To delete a group, just use the command group had, del. To add a group, just use group add. To modify a group, just use group mod. So we will see. Now, for this case, very interesting thing here comes up. For these particular files, how do I change? How do I change or how do I assign a different group to who? To Bookshop. How do I assign a different group to Bookshop? So to assign a different group to Bookshop, what I need to do, I need to do what? Group mod. So for group mod, we can actually, let's say, root. Let me change it to country. And then let's say Bookshop. Okay, so in this case, is it Bookshop root? First of all, the issue here. Okay, so group mod root country does not exist. Okay, let me see. So it becomes from, okay, so it is country, full colon root, then Bookshop. Okay, let's see, new name, new group. Okay, password. So we have some more info here. So let me just say -n and then put it in C. Bookshop. Okay, just say. Okay, so let me just have a look at it. So meanwhile, for that case, remember we have so many commands, so I need also to probably, as I think out or as I try to bring out the concept, let's talk about the file permissions, because we have now the second part. So the second part is about what? Controlling access to files. Controlling access to files. Now, when it comes to controlling access to files, we have different ways on how we can convert. So when it comes to assigning passwords, let's say, so when it comes to using accessing Linux file system or even not file system, But when controlling access to files, we have different ways on how we can do that. And the first thing is for us to understand what? To understand the concept of the permissions. Now, for example, if I bring ls-l, press enter, you can see that we have all these concepts. Now, R stands for what? R stands for read. So R stands for read. We have W stands for write. And then we have X standing for what? Execute. X standing for execute. Now, we also have specific number. When it comes to read, we have 4 representing read. When it comes to write, we have 2 representing write. And then we have what? We have execute representing 1. Now, if you had all these permissions, it becomes 4 plus 2 plus 1 equals to what? Equals to 7. Equals to 7. So what this means is that we have 3 sections in a file, or the owners of a file can be categorized into 3 sections. The user can own the file, the group can own the file, and the other users can also own the file. And in this case, we are talking about bookshop. Now look at this. These file permissions actually come into 3. We have RWX, RWX. So it means that this one in full, this one is full is 7. This one again is 7 because it is 4 plus 2 plus 1. And then this one again is 7. Yeah. Now, when it comes like that, you'll find out that for this one, it actually represents what? Users. For the second one, it represents what? It represents groups. It represents groups. And then the last one, it represents what? Other users. So we have users, groups, and others. Again, you can come and say, this one is U, this one is G, and this one is what? Is O. So you can have users, groups, others. You can have UGO, or you can have RWX for users, RWX for groups, and RWX for others. Now, here it means that it's not a must. It's not advisable that you should give all the full permissions. So it means that for the full permissions, it becomes 777. But for any file, especially even if you're coming up with a file or text file or a directory, it's not always having a full permissions. So for example, whatever thing we have, let's say ls-l, you can see, for example, bookshop as a folder or a directory has these permissions. Now, of course, the D means what? Directory. So the permission starts from there. So you can see the one that I've highlighted, that is users. Then comes to what? The second part is groups. And then that part, the final part is what? Is others. So if I'm to give, let's say, the permission, so let's RWX, of course, the full R-X, R-X. So this number, it means what? It means that for the users, this one is 7. For the groups, this one is 4 plus 0 plus 1, it is 5. And then for the others, again, it is 4 plus 0 plus 1, it is 5. So what do we get? We get 755. That is for what? That is for the bookshop as a directory. So by default, whenever you are coming up or whenever you create a directory in Linux operating system or in Red Hat operating system, you will always find that by default, it will give you a permission of 755. Now, for this again, for the text file is different. We have RW dash, we have R dash dash, we have R dash dash. Then, so what is the essence? So in this case, it means that This is users, which is 5 plus 2, which is 6 plus 0, it is 6. Then here, for the groups, it means that it is 4 plus 0 plus 0, it is 4. And then for the others, it means that it is 4 plus 0 plus 0, which is 4. So by default, a file will always have a full permissions or a permissions of what? 6, 4, 4. So by default, unless you change it, So this is what kind of restrictions, because when it comes to permissions, how can you restrict or how can you allow a user or different users to do what? To have permissions. Now, so let's see, if I do ls-l and press enter, you can see that these are the default permissions. But how can we do this? How can we add or how can we make these permissions, especially for the groups to have full permissions and for the others to have full permissions? So this means that we have a command called chmod for change mode, chmod for change mode. So what happens here, it means what? It means that if you want to give full permissions, you can say 777. But in this case, we know that if I'm giving it to Bookshop, already Bookshop has 7 on the user side. So let's see, Bookshop, press enter. Then let me check again. Now you can see what? You can see that this one already has full permissions. If I want to get rid of everything, let's say I will just use what? 000, press enter. And then do what? ls-l, press enter. You can see now that I have 0 permissions. For the directory, for the bookshop.txt file again, I can just use what? txt, then come back ls-l, press enter. You can see that we do not have any permissions on what? On Bookshop. Now, if you decide that you want to give, let's say, others on the directory Bookshop or Bookshop directory, you want to give full permissions, especially the others. How can you go about? So chmod. So just to know the way they are stationed or they are actually positioned. So for others, it's actually at the last. So if I have 007, it means that I am ignoring or I'm making users and groups to have 0 permissions, and then for others to have full permissions. So if I come ls-l, now you can see what? You can see that I have full permissions here. Now, what happens if you want to give all of them full permissions? You can say 777 and then Bookshop space, you can say bookshop.txt at once. Press enter. ls-l. You can see now that we have the full permissions on both sides. So this is all about understanding what? Understanding permissions. Now, remember, we've actually employed numbers, or we actually used numbers. How can we use letters? Since we know that letters represents UGO for users, groups, and others. So for this case, when it comes to Bookshop, I can decide I do not want to have what? The users, for the groups and others to have any permission. So I'll just say use chmod. So here I can say GO minus what? Minus RWX and then Bookshop. If I press enter and then come back to the file, now you can see that I have actually removed what? The permissions for others and groups. Permissions for others and groups. Now, so that brings us to the final part, which is about what? About managing or monitoring and managing Linux processes. Now, when we talk about processes, we have different commands that can point to processes. For example, we have the ps command. You press enter, you can see how your system is. We have these commands. Each command must be attached to a process ID, and you can expand it, especially the ps command. You can say -ef, press enter, and it can display it in so many ways. So we have different commands. We have ps command, which can help you know more about the processes. We also have the top command, which gives you the current active process information, and every 3 seconds it keeps on changing, and it's actually a very interesting part here. So when it comes to processes, we have a lot of information to understand. If you want to stop, you can just press Control Z. And so top command and the PS commands are the main commands that usually works on. And for this, it gives you how your machine or how your operating system actually fared. So for this case, you can check that we have the process ID, we have the user ID, we have the priority, we have the niceness, we have the virtual memory, we have this again, it's about the memory, we have the shared memory, we have the modes now. This is the sleeping mode, the percentage of CPU used, percentage of memory used, the time, and then the respective command. So on this note, I will stop there for this particular tutorial. And then on the next tutorial, we will extend on this, on talking about managing processes. So up to there, just read ahead, get some more information, and you will be in a better position to get to know more. So thank you, and that is the end of our presentation.